I'm a professor of education in the teacher education department here at Brevard College. And I first wanted to welcome you. This is our second of a series of forums across the spring for diversity. Just wanted to alert you to these posters are out in the hallway. They'll be out there at the reception. Please feel free to come to other sessions we will have. Our next session will be on the impact of poverty and race in the classroom setting, and that will be run by Sheila Mooney, who's an expert National Board Certified Counselor. She used to work for Davidson River Alternative School, and she's a licensed professional counselor and a Master's of Education, and will be with us talking about those important issues. We also have other forums ranging from topics about welcoming LGBT students into your classroom, and we have Brevard High classroom teacher coming who's part of the Brevard High School Acceptance Club, and also part of the Safe Rape Prevention Education Coordinator will be with us on March 19th. And then on Wednesday, March 20th, we have an expert on autism, and she will be speaking to us at 5:30 and running a workshop. These are all free and open to the public and will be posted on our school's website, so please look for those opportunities. So did you know that on January 27th, 2019 was Holocaust Memorial Day? It was established in 2001 to help make sure that no one forgets the Holocaust. The Holocaust was a state-sponsored genocide of more than 6 million Jews who were rounded up and killed, either in labor camps or in gas chambers. Masterminded by Adolf Hitler, the Holocaust happened during World War II. Other groups, including Slavs, the Roma, the quote, incurably sick or disabled, political and religious dissenters, such as communists and Jehovah's Witnesses, as well as gay men, were also exterminated or killed, resulting in up to 17 million deaths overall. Now, currently in the United States, over 20% of millennials, and those are people who have come of age in the 21st century, have not heard of or are not sure that they've heard of the Holocaust. This was also the case for 11% of us older adults. Additionally, more than 60% of millennials did not know what Auschwitz was, a large 3-part camp in southern Poland that housed a prison camp, an extermination camp, and a slave labor camp. Perhaps most concerning of all is that 70% of adults today agreed with the statement that, quote, fewer people seem to care about the Holocaust as much as they used to, while 58% believe that something like the Holocaust could happen again. I remember when I was in high school, way back in 1980, and Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor and author, came to speak to my school. He told us heart-wrenching stories about the Holocaust. I will never forget his parting final question to us. He asked us, what is the opposite of love? What do you think is the opposite of love? What? Hate? Indifference. Okay, some of you read the book. Many of us offered the words such as evil and hate. He waited, and finally he said, the opposite of love is indifference. We must speak up. We must listen. We must take the risk to care and connect with others. So when Walter Blass, an old family friend, reached out to let me know how much he had enjoyed being part of the Woodrow Wilson Fellows, speaking on college campuses and meeting with more than 400 middle schoolers and college students to tell about his stories of being a young boy in the Holocaust, I asked the members of the Brevard College community, and people said, yes, we need him to come here and share his stories. Now, growing up, all I knew about Walter was what a child might understand. He gave me my first teddy bear, a Steiff bear from Austria. At age 8, he taught me how to make and flip crepes by practicing flipping pot holders in a frying pan. At 16, he taught me how to find a cheap parking space in New York City and to drive fast on the Jersey Turnpike. And perhaps most importantly, he would always arrive with a huge dark Swiss chocolate bar. Now, a quick scan of Walter's resume, and it's clear he's truly an expert in actually many realms. He was an assistant desk officer in the Foreign Aid Program in Laos, Thailand, a Navy officer aboard a ship. He worked for the phone company A&T for more than 25 years and ended up being the director of strategic planning for that company. He served 2 years as a director of the Peace Corps in Afghanistan. And he taught for 20 years as a visiting professor in France, Singapore, Mexico City, Moscow. And he served for 41 years as a trustee for Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today and tomorrow, many of you have had the distinct privilege of having Walter come speak in your classroom. Now be forewarned, he does sometimes curse. He always asks big questions, and he's generous with his willingness to serve as a mentor. Now, our mission at Brevard College includes our commitment to an experiential liberal arts education that encourages personal growth and inspires artistic and intellectual and social action. Walter Blass's visit, whoops, awkward there, supports our efforts to create rich, experiential, liberal arts educational moments. Already we've had Walter Blass inspire a collaboration between Brevard Middle School and our English department and our art history department. They were on campus on Friday to learn about art history and propaganda during the Holocaust time period. We will have Walter speak tonight, and with the time remaining, we may have a chance for some questions and answers, and there'll be a brief reception afterwards, so please do linger. So together with our local co-sponsoring organizations, Project Empathy of Transylvania County, that seeks to listen to one another and build a better community through empathy, and the Democracy Project that seeks to explore ideas of citizenship and encourage members of our community of all ages to fall in love with democracy. We welcome you, Walter, refugee, world citizen, and storyteller.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back in Western North Carolina. I just figured out after I got on stage that it has been 65 years since I came up to Waynesville, North Carolina with my wife while I was a Navy officer in Supply Corps School at Athens, Georgia. And it's hot in Athens, it's cool in Waynesville, Western North Carolina, and I have wonderful memories of coming here and enjoying the weekends. I'm here tonight because I was asked to talk about the Holocaust. And as Megan has pointed out, a lot of people don't know what it is, don't care, and think that there was only one Holocaust. And as someone who survived that one, I would point out, you can look around, and I served as a Peace Corps country director in Afghanistan. There are 3 mounds about 100 feet high, 300 feet long, in the middle of Afghanistan. And the American ambassador asked his Afghan guide, "That's the weirdest geological formation I have ever seen, parallel such mounds." And the Afghan guy said, "They're not geological. They are the result of Genghis Khan and then his grandson Tamerlane coming through Afghanistan, killing thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people, piling them up into these mounds, which have since, been covered with dirt and grass and whatever is flying around." So you can go back in history and see that there have been one Holocaust after the other. We just have one going on right now in Myanmar, Burma. We have one going on in Syria, South Sudan, where the Arabs are killing people of color who are not Arabs and who are not Muslims. So this phenomenon has been going on for a very long time. And part of what I want to do this evening, and I will have plenty of time. My instructions were to not speak more than 45, 50 minutes, And you'll have lots of time to ask questions, and we've figured out the mics and so forth, and I think Megan will walk around with the portable mic so you can be heard. I was born in Germany in 1930, 3 years before Hitler became chancellor, in an election, I might point out. Okay, legally, he became the leader of Germany after very difficult circumstances. Germany started the First World War, lost that war, was penalized with incredible reparations that they had to pay to the Brits and the French for the war, resulting in inflation, resulting in deprivation, the inability to buy food. And one of the things that happened was that I think the grandparents of Megan Kaiser were involved at one point, I believe in Germany, of a Quaker assistance program as soup kitchens in Germany, where my father lived and was kept alive, both at the end of the war in Austria and then later in Germany, and as you will hear, as part of my journey to the United States. Let's see, I think I have a clicker which will work. Let's try this. I was a very happy child in Germany. I think this is a picture of me as a 3-year-old. And I had no idea, Hitler, Nazis, Gestapo, all that. In 1933, when Hitler became the chancellor, he had an executive order that prohibited any Jews from the professions, law, medicine, university professors, government jobs. My father was a patent attorney, so he fell under that ruling, and he tendered his resignation to the senior partner of the firm in Cologne, Germany. The partner burst out and said, "Richard, don't be crazy. We need you. Write the patent applications. We'll just have some Aryan sign the darn thing." And so he worked what the French called au noir, in the black, as the background person for the patent law firm until 1935. I was a 5-year-old, I was happy, we lived in an apartment, and he said, "Walter, would you like to come on a business trip with me?" I said, "Yeah, great." And he said, "Well, pack a little bag, take your teddy bear, take a change of underwear. We're going to Brussels, and we'll be back in a few days." And I was delighted, and we went to the railroad station to take the train. It's a 2-hour train ride. With anybody who was willing to listen to me about how happy I was to go with my daddy on a business trip. When we got to Brussels, however, and got in a taxi, we went to a place, I didn't know, that had a big iron fence from the street to the buildings, and he disappeared inside. 10 minutes later, he came out, he said, "Come on, we're going inside." So I followed him, and then he said, "You're going to stay here by yourself for 3 weeks, and I'm going back to Cologne and get your mother out, because it would have been impossible for the 3 of us to leave all at once. It would have been too much of a sign that we were trying to escape from Germany, and we would have gotten arrested. So I am taking you out, and we will be back in 3 weeks." I was talking about this with Megan's parents, and I have no memory whatsoever other than this iron fence. I try not to have memories that aren't genuine, and that, you know, I've sort of absorbed from people talking about where we lived and what we did and so forth. But anyway, I have no memory of those 3 weeks. But once my mother came and we moved into a very nice house in a very nice suburb of Brussels, I was desperate to stay with my mother. It was summertime. They put me in a day camp on the other side of town, and I ran away. The teacher wasn't looking. I sneaked down the alley. I got on the next bus in the middle of town, and evidently the school called up my parents and said, your son ran away. You better get downtown where the bus stops because he's going to get lost. And I remember that part. I remember that when I was in the bus, and I, you know, was comfortable. I was 5 years old, and all of a sudden there was my mother, waiting, you know, glancing at every window of every bus that came by. So, you know, yes, it was a sort of adventure story, but it also was, you know, filled with some anxiety. In this case, separation anxiety. I was a very happy child, again, in Brussels. Here, one of the things we escaped from was these German signs. Pay attention, beware, Jews, a Jewish-owned store. At the same time, I was living in a very nice house. There I am, I think age 7, 8, something like that, with the little girl that I played with in Germany. She obviously came to visit. She brought her dolls. I had my teddy bear. We had a wonderful time. Everything was great until May. Until May 10th, 1940. And I was in bed. I had German measles. I yelled out to my parents and to the other couple that lived in the same house, namely the chief engineer of the firm that my father was working with, and said, is there another earthquake? Because there'd been an earthquake, and as I walked home from school, those round the red tiles, kept crashing on the ground. And Mr. Sereny came up and said, no, there's a war. And I said, what's a war? Nobody ever talked about a war. So he said, look, there are air raids. You have to go into the cellar. So if there's a bomb, it won't hurt you. So I kept going upstairs and downstairs and upstairs and downstairs. When I went to breakfast, my father wasn't there. And I asked, where is he? My mother said that he had been arrested by the police at 8 o'clock in the morning of the day of the invasion. After the 4th day, he wasn't in the armory anymore. All the men were gone. And the rumor among the women who had come to see their husbands was that all the men had been piled into a boxcar and pushed over the French frontier, which was then at 25, 30 miles south and west, and nobody knew where they were. So my mother and the other couple had a sort of council of war and decided to get out of Dodge. You know, in the First World War, the German invasion never made it to Brussels. In the Second World War, the King of Belgium offered Brussels as a open city, you know, just sort of gave up. Probably saving a lot of lives, because then, you know, we didn't get bombed the way that a lot of other people did. I want to show you in the next segment a 3-minute video clip from a series that was done in the 1970s here in America, based on 2 books of Herman Wouk called Winds of War and War and Remembrance, referring back to what Megan was saying. The scene that you will see is actually sort of a Hollywoodized version of what I sustain, which is a strafing by German planes of refugees in a road. This particular segment is of a refugee column in Poland, where the people who are principals in this book get involved. It's a very shocking video. I was asked in the fall of 2017 to talk about my experience with 400 sixth graders in Gainesville, North Georgia. And I didn't show it because I don't think that 8-year-olds should see people being strafed, being killed on the road just because they are refugees. But I think this audience is different. And in the spirit of what Megan was saying about remembering, I'd like to show you this, and then in the question and answer period, talk about this. So here we go. I went through an episode like this. Mr. Cerny, the chief engineer, was driving the car. We were on a road, bumper to bumper, in northern France. The war was going on. And the Germans deliberately strafed, shot at the refugee column in order, A, to disable the cars, B, to cause chaos so that the French could not resupply their troops fighting further north, and absolutely caring nothing about the health, the life of the refugees. What you saw, I think the producer was trying to illustrate with the horses and the lances the inability of the Polish army to respond to this attack. And that was almost the same thing that the French had thought, oh, we'll build a whole bunch of forts along the German frontier, Alsace-Lorraine and that area. And in fact, the Germans did this sort of, Hail Mary pass through Holland and Belgium into France. And, you know, they just about walked through the place. I think the French resistance lasted just about a month. I think June 20th, June 22nd, when the war broke out, May 10th, was the end of the war. There was an armistice, everybody stopped fighting, and the Germans settled that all of the part of France, which they had already occupied, if you will, from the city of Bordeaux in the west, all the way to the Italian frontier in the east. This was occupied France. This was run by the Germans directly, no interference from the French. There was an unoccupied part of France called Vichy, after the drinking water, where there was a French presence, but that's all. It was just a presence. We were already further south, and that's what I want to talk about in the next segment, which is that we arrived at a city called Agen in the posters that Megan very kindly and Christy Cobble put together, I drew a line from Cologne, Germany to Brussels, to Ostend at the beach where we spent a day, and then a line almost due south. Mr. Sereny had said, well, let's go to Paris. I have a sister there. She can help us. And my mother, who had never set foot in a university, just high school, said, absolutely not. The Germans never conquered Paris in World War I, and you know darn well that's where Hitler's going to go. So let's not go to Paris because we'll get caught. In fact, my best friend in Brussels, he and his parents did go to Paris. It was surrounded by the Germans. Once the armistice was signed, you know, there was no going back, as though you were going home. And Pierre Hahn's parents left him with a group of Catholic nuns in an orphanage in Paris and said, please raise our boy. We don't want to take him back because I think we're going to get exterminated. And they did. They died in Poland in one of these camps. So this effect of what was happening was sort of burned into my conscience. Much later, needless to say, you know, obviously I didn't find out about this until either the middle of the war or the end. But it made a big impression on me. So we're in Agen, and let's see. This is my father's identity card. I don't have my mother's, but she had an identical one with this red stripe through it, showing that she was a foreigner. You will, let's see if I can illustrate this. Let's see, we got one more. You notice up here, it says nationalité autrichienne, Allemagne. In other words, nationality German. And just as we have an expression, a derogatory expression about Germans, oh, you're Krauts. The French have the similar expression that vous êtes des Boches. You're Germans. And he said, off to prison. So my mother and I and Mr. Sereny and his German wife, we all ended up guests of the French government in the city jail in Agen. I've been back there. I saw the place where we were. I didn't have the nerve, the courage to go back into the jail. And it was 1974, so we're talking about 30 years after the war. We were in the jail. The guy who was the head of the jail had too darn many refugees, and he told the two women, my mother and Mrs. Sereny, that he was sending them to a concentration camp in the Pyrenees Mountains. And my mother said, well, if it has to be, it has to be. But what are you going to do with my boy? And he said, look, lady, you're 40 years old, you're in good health. If ever you should have to stay the winter, you will survive, but your kid won't. It's at 3,000 feet, it's next to a swamp. The boy will get pneumonia or the flu, and you won't have a son. And she said, okay, what are you going to do with it? Don't worry, we'll take care of it. The way they took care of me was to send me to a home for delinquent children. So as I said to Megan's parents, all of my bad manners are the fault of the French. Okay? They robbed me blind the first night, my Boy Scout knife, the money I had in my pockets, anything of value. My mother had given me a heavy overcoat and instructed me never to let go of it. And it turned out that 6 months later, when we were reunited, she said they were gold coins sewed into the hem of the overcoat, so that if I was alone, there would be some money to pay for food and shelter. I was in that home for 4 months. It wasn't as bad as you might think, because for some reason the mail kept going. I received postcards and letters from my mother asking how I was doing. Eventually, she wrote me that she had been liberated. The French government decided with the armistice that all the women would be released, period. Very French, okay? Women okay, men not okay. So while my mother was released, she found out that my father was also in one of these concentration camps, but at the other side of France, right next to the Spanish border in Saint-Cyprien. And the way she found that out was that these women were very clever. Those of you who are old enough will remember that before Xerox machines, there was something called a mimeograph machine. Okay, it's kind of a purple paper that reproduced whatever the print was. Not very clearly, somewhat fuzzy, but you could read it. Women wrote up rosters of all the women in their camp and sent it around to all the camps that had the men, so that wives and husbands would at least know where each other was. And that's how she found my father. And she wrote me a letter saying, I tried to telephone you, but it didn't work. I'm going to go to Saint-Cyprien and get your father free, and one of us will come and get you. And it would not surprise you to learn that I wrote back, and I still have that letter at home in schoolboy lettering, in French, of course, saying, no, you come get me first. And she was wise enough not to follow my advice. She got my father out. If you want to know the details, we can go into this in the Q&A. But he came to get me out. And he found me not in the home for delinquent children, but in the Veterans Hospital next door. I had some kind of eczema all over my body. You know, if you know something about scabies, that sounds very much like it. And the hospital administrator said, Mr. Blass, you can't get your boy until you pay for the expense of taking care of him. So you owe me 17,000 francs, which is, 2,500. And my father argued, and like a tennis match. And finally, at the end of half an hour or something, my father pulls out a checkbook and says, all right, I'll give you the 17,000 francs. So then we hitchhiked from Agen to the east coast of, the west coast of France. East. And I burst out crying and said, Daddy, I'm so unhappy that I caused you to lose so much money. And he said, Walter, come on. You're old enough to realize. Do you really think the Germans would allow a bank in Brussels to send 17,000 francs to unoccupied France? The Germans aren't that stupid. And he said, besides, there was no money in the account. I told your mother to send all of the money that she didn't need to my brother in London, and that's where our money is, and we can get at it. Well, okay, so that was that. My father took me back to the shack which he and my mother were living in. One bed, all of us in the one bed. I don't know how they managed it, because as you saw from the previous picture, I was kind of a big boy by age 10. But we got together, we went to Marseille. And the reason for Marseille was that all the consulates of foreign countries were there, and you could get a visa to a country to escape from Nazi occupation. My father somehow, I don't know whether it was he heard it on the street or he remembered the Quakers helping him in 1919 in Vienna, in 1924 in Germany. But he went to the American Friends Service Committee office, met a very string bean of a man, 6'5", Burns Chalmers, who I think Megan's father knew. You know, these coincidences are unbelievable. This Burns Chalmers said, Mr. Blass, you get a visa to any damn country that will have you. Okay, don't worry where. South America, Asia, Australia, it doesn't matter. Get a visa and get out of here, because this status of unoccupied France won't last. And it didn't. The moment that the US invaded North Africa, the Germans immediately occupied Marseille, Montpellier, all these towns. But that didn't happen while I was there. So my father succeeded in getting a visa, and there is my mother's visa to the Dominican Republic. Okay, they speak Spanish, not French. I could have been a Spanish speaker, but I'm not. Anyway, she got this Dominican visa, and Burns Chalmers said, now go back to the American consulate in Marseille, talk to the vice consul, Hiram Bingham, and try to get a transit visa to the United States. So my father, you know, we was living in Marseille. I was 10 years old. I had a good time, frankly. I was too much of a blabbermouth, so they parked me with a family where there were 3 girls, one my age, one I think 2 years younger, and a little baby in a baby carriage. And Zazo and I had a wonderful time. There are lots of hills in Marseille, and you know, you can go up and climb. And we devised a game. We would take the baby carriage with the baby inside, roll it up to the top of the hill, and then let go and catch it before it rolled into the street or it hit a tree. Well, you can imagine the neighbors got a hold of the baby's parents, Zazo's parents, and said, those kids are doing something terrible. You're going to lose your child. So that was the end of that game. But they were wonderful to me, and as an only child, it's the first time and the only time I've had 3 sisters. But what I'm saying to you is, in the middle of all of this war, separation from my parents, and so forth, there were times that were pure adventure and great fun. And one of the things about being a refugee is that you don't know what's going to happen from one minute to the next. One of the things that my father noticed was that there were German soldiers in uniform walking around he had sneaked into Marseille because he was not allowed under the laissez-passer, the slip that he was liberated with, said you may not go east of the département de Hérault. And Marseille was outside. He was captured. He was sent to another concentration camp in Les Milles, just north of Marseille. And this was while I was having the three sisters. The rumor among the men was that they were going to get transferred to Gers, where my mother had been. And my mother, who could talk to my father across the fence, said, Richard, you have got to get out. You will never get out if you go to Gers. It's in the middle of nowhere, and there's no place to hide, and people will turn you in. So my father got over the fence, I don't know, 10 foot, 12 foot, whatever, climbed over, hid in a garbage truck that went to Marseille, got a hold of my mother, got a hold of me, and we were on the midnight train west and went to Montpellier, which is in the territory that he was allowed to be in. Ended up there at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there was one, I don't know, railroad person on the quay, and so my father said, would you recommend a hotel that we could go to? And the man burst out laughing and said, Mister, you're crazy. No hotel is open at this hour. Come with me, we'll put you up for the night. We were the only people standing there after the train had left. And he said, come with us, come with me, we'll put you up, and in the morning you can find a hotel. Again, wonderful, life-saving hospitality. So we set up household in Montpellier, and my father would sneak back to Marseille once a month trying to get this transit visa. And Mr. Bingham, the vice consul, kept saying no. And he issued my mother, actually, this is the first page. You see his signature. He issued him a visa, but with my father's hand on the doorknob, he said, I don't have any more transit visas, but would you like a permanent visa for 3 people? And my father said, absolutely. You know, and that night, boy, did we celebrate. As the previous, this is the second page. That's the picture up of in the middle of the one you saw on the poster that Megan designed. And my mother. And you notice the magic numbers. And it was these numbers that allowed us to get into the United States. This is what today is ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, we're looking for. Okay, A, the visa, with the signature and the stamp of the State Department, and the number. What my father had no idea of, and nor did I, is that this document was fake. But fake from the vice consul. He was so outraged at the anti-Semitism in the State Department that he himself took one of these Jewish refugees into his own house to hide him from the Germans, and proceeded eventually to hand out visas like that to hundreds of people. You know, when the State Department discovered that he was issuing visas with the stamp and the number and everything looking great, but never telling Washington what he was doing. They nabbed him and sent him to Rio de Janeiro and eventually cashiered him. So there we were, we had visas. Now that was not the end of the story. The Gestapo had told the governors, the equivalent of governors, of each one of the départements in France, in unoccupied France, do not give exit visas to Jews. You had to get an exit visa to leave France. You couldn't get into Spain, or for that matter, Portugal, if you didn't have an exit visa. So my mother, was bugging the Spanish and the Portuguese consulate for a transit visa through Spain. And the Spaniard said, lady, you can't fly. You have to take the train. You can't walk, okay? And you don't have an exit visa from France. So forget about the Spanish visa. And she realized that she absolutely had to get an exit visa, whether the prefect was under orders or not. So she spent a whole month every day going to his office, bugging him for the exit visa. And finally he said, lady, if you promise never to darken my door again, I'll give you the damn thing. And that's how we got an exit visa. And then we, got on the train. It was an adventure. Sorry. We went up to near Pau, sort of halfway back to Bordeaux, and went, I don't know why we didn't take the train directly from Montpellier, Nîmes, and so forth, Toulouse. We went up to Conflans. I have the documents on the back of the Dominican visa, is all of the steps that we took. Just to show you, it says on that document that my father was taking 54,000 francs with him in cash. Okay? He had to declare that money. Eventually I realized that must be how my father was able to keep us in hotels, pay for food, take the train back and forth to Marseille and so forth. Anyway, I was under the impression that he had gotten this visa, my father, the 3 visas, because he was so charming and so intelligent. He made such a good impression. In 2008, I went to Grenoble to friends of Megan's parents, a guy who worked for the International Labor Organization in Geneva, and he said, wait a minute, what's the story about your father getting a visa from the consul in Marseille? And I said, yes, my father must have impressed him greatly. And he said, excuse me, there's a different story here. It turns out that there was an American named Varian Fry who was sent by the Emergency Rescue Committee to get 50 very prominent Jews out of unoccupied France. Walter Benjamin, the poet, Marc Chagall, the artist, Hannah Arendt, the author, Franz Werfel, the novelist, and so forth. Between Varian Fry and Hiram Bingham conniving with Fry, illegally it turns out, to give us visas, we got permission to come to the United States. According to the history books, Fry and Bingham and company succeeded in getting 2,000 people out of Marseille through these efforts. And they didn't do it alone. I have a book by a woman called Mary Jane Gold, who was, 30-something in those days. And she was what today we would call an adventuress. gorgeous blonde, lots of money, could buy an airplane, went to Biarritz, to the beach in the summer, the French Alps in the winter, had a great time. And she went to Bering Fry and said, "Can I help you?" And he took one look at her and said, "How?" And she said, "Well, my boyfriend is a mafioso and he knows how to get people out. And furthermore, I got lots of money and I'd be glad to contribute something to this cause." And she was really instrumental, running errands, going to visit people, and so forth. So again, this story of refugees gets to be incredibly complicated and not what you think or what you were sure of. And the last step, which I'll stop and then let you ask questions, is here is the ship's manifest of when we arrived in New York. My father was successful in getting one berth in third class in a freighter down in the next to the keel of a ship. He took $20 with him, leaving the rest of the money with my mother to take care of me and herself, and said, "I'll see you in New York." And it took us, I think, the better part of a month or 6 weeks more to find two berths on this SS Guinée, and the Americans couldn't spell it right. Guinée in French has two E's, not one. And although it's very hard to read, I can assure you that it says here on the third line, Malvi Rosenblatt, Blass. And the next line, the fourth line, says Walter, 16. In publicity, if you want to ask questions, I can tell you. But it's 8 o'clock. I think you have half an hour or something like that.
So like 10 to 15 minutes of questions, and then we'll shift into the reception. So if you have a question, I'd like to, you're going to stand up and, okay, all you people who like Phil Donahue, this is your chance, right?
Actually, I'm sorry, there's not a question. I just want to mention something about the Dominican Republic. I was born there, and when I was about 10, I was in a convent school, boarding school, outside of the capital city. And I remember a line of refugees, German refugees, coming behind our school. The dictator had built this small village for German refugees. And I remember all of these strange people to me walking by. And I remember reaching out to one of the ladies and giving her a fruit to taste. And she made a face.
Would you remind me of the country that you're
Dominican Republic.
Thank you, where we were supposed to be going.
Right, that's where I was born.
What a coincidence.
And I saw that. I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much. I think there's somebody here in front.
I just wondered what you would or do say if somebody says to you they don't think the Holocaust happened.
Well, let me tell you, I think there's enough physical evidence. My cousin in England found that my aunt, who lived in Holland, Irene Blass, was taken prisoner by the Germans in Holland in 1943. And there's a paper trail all the way to her extermination in Poland. The Germans did it. It's not as though they were trying to hide it. They were very open. They said, we're going to get rid of these people. There was a conference on one of the lakes around Berlin called the Wannsee Conference, where the German government said, it is our policy to get rid of all Jews in Europe, period. You can deny the Holocaust, be my guest, but there is a lot of evidence from the Germans themselves that they were out to get rid of all of these people that Megan mentioned at the beginning. More questions?
Thank you so very much for being here tonight. I grew up outside of New York City. My grandparents came from outside of Prague, Czechoslovakia at that time. And my mother worked in several of the factories, the hat factory, the pajama factory, the coat factory outside of New York City. And she would come home and say, you know, honey, there are women there that have tattoos on their arms. And I just want to tell you young people, when I see some folks with these tattoos all over them, it reminds me of how I was growing up and seeing these women that were tattooed not for beauty, not for a personal expression of how they wanted to show their individuality, but because they were in a camp and Hitler's guards did that to them. And I'm so thankful that they made it to America.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Yes.
I just had a question. Do you still keep in contact with those three sisters that you talked about at all?
No, I lost track of them. I know that the girl that I played with, who was my age, Zazo, went to Israel and was married. I don't know how I found this out, but I did. I can't find her. I have a cousin who's in Jerusalem, and she basically said, you can advertise in the newspaper, but the chance that she will see it, or somebody who knows her will see it, or after all, I'm 88, so Zazo must be the same age if she was alive at 88. They had gone to Madagascar for a period of years, and I don't know what disease she might have picked up on the island of Madagascar. So the answer is no. I saw somebody else.
Right here.
Okay,
How much time did your mom and dad take you away from them?
please.
How much time did your mom and dad take you away from them?
How long were you gone from your parents?
Basically 4 months. I was in the home for delinquent children, then I was in the hospital with scabies or whatever. But I kept getting letters for those 4 months. And then we were together from September, October of 1940. My father left for America, I think in February, March of 41. And a month later or so, we followed and were reunited in New York. He was late to the dock, and we almost went to Staten Island, where they take people who don't have papers or don't have somebody to greet them, to meet. You had to have somebody pick you up at the dock in Staten Island. Yes?
Yeah. Who was the first American person that you met when you got off the boat, and what was it like?
Well, two things. One, there was another passenger on this list who was the son of the owner of the shoe factory that my father was working with in Brussels. And he actually lived in Waynesville and ran the factory in Waynesville. And my mother had seen a comment on the ship to the effect that a woman had lost her fountain pen. And anybody who found it could get 50 cents. And so she gave me this and said, go to that lady and get your 50 cents. But my mother had found it. So I had a beautiful $50 piece. And I landed in New York, and Heinz Holman, I said, Heinz, could you, obviously in French, I knew not a word of English. I said to Heinz, could you change this? I'd like to get some coins. So he pulled out a quarter and a dime, maybe 2 dimes and a nickel, and gave them to me. And I said, here's your $50. He said, no, you keep it. So now I had a whole dollar. That was the first person. The second person was a Red Cross lady who was on the dock handing out donuts and coffee. I hated coffee, but boy, I loved the donuts. And she spoke French. So we had a wonderful conversation. And when my father showed up, she said, here's my telephone number. Once you get settled in New York, call me up. You can take the subway to South Ferry and the ferry to Staten Island, and I'll treat you to lunch and teach you how to use chopsticks. And that was the second person in America. I was really well received. My parents, just as they had been eager to get me into school in Belgium, were eager to get me into school in New York. So the first Monday after we landed in New York, they put me in the PS 103 on Amsterdam Avenue. And the teacher was so used to having immigrants, she told a girl who was fluent in French to sit next to me and translate for me. And again, I found out that, yeah, that was great. You know, I had my personal interpreter. But I could tell her after 2 days, I can read what it says on the blackboard. English is a combination of Saxon and French, because that was the successive invasions of England. So 80% of what was on the board I could read, but I couldn't make any sense of what the teacher said. It was completely incomprehensible. Yes?
How did your mom liberate your dad from the concentration camp?
Well, I think they just, one day announced to all the inmates, we're going to give you a paper, a laissez-passer, that is, let you pass with your name. I can't find that from my mother. I have the one from my father, but I don't have the one from my mother. And on something like the 22nd of June or something like that, she was let out of the camp. Evidently, she was able, the French were reasonably honest in giving people back the money or the possessions that they had had. So my mother was able to, get the train, I assume it was the train, to Saint-Cyprien to get my father.
We're gonna have one more question over here from Dahl, and then we're gonna close with just a quick thank you.
Hello, my name's Dal, and nice to meet you. Thank you for coming. My question is, we know that you were fleeing systemic discrimination from your homeland, and when you made it to America, did you see similar things systemically of discrimination, and today, do you have any anxiety about that becoming a huge problem?
Well, you may remember, most of you were not born when President Roosevelt interned, I think, 150,000 Japanese who were residents of California, Nevada, Texas, all the way east to Colorado, as enemy aliens. Some of them were actually American citizens, but they were Japanese Americans, and he ordered them into camps in Montana, in Wyoming, in Utah, all over the place. So I got a very sick feeling from reading, I was fascinated. Within, a year, 2 years, I could read English, I could read the newspapers, I listened to the radio. I remember Pearl Harbor. We were driving in my father's business car, and somebody came on the radio and said a war has broken out. The Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor. And, I got lots more stories to tell, but I'm not going to do it tonight. As for today, I'm appalled at the treatment that refugees have received. And in some ways, it's very similar to what the experience was in 1940. Refugees were not wanted. Refugees were, you know, I think in one of the classes here at Brevard, one of the teachers showed a video of the SS St. Louis, which was a German ship that came to Cuba, let off a handful of people who could probably bribe the Cuban authorities to let their relatives off the ship. Then came to New York, where the ship was not allowed to dock, period. Went back towards Germany, stopped in Southampton, I think, and again in Le Havre on the French coast, and ended up in Germany, and everybody was on that ship who hadn't gotten off. A few in England, a few in France, perished in the Holocaust. There's a marvelous book called Refugee by Alan Gratz, G-R-A-T-Z, that very cleverly combines three different stories. A boy named Joseph, who's very similar to me, who was born in Germany and so forth. A girl from Cuba who left in, I don't know, 2000 or something like that, when Cubans who set foot on American soil were allowed to come into the country. But if they were caught in the ocean before setting foot on the shore, they were sent back to Cuba. And the third person is a boy, Yusuf, who's a Syrian refugee, currently. And he weaves these three stories together, and I encourage you, it's a book written for teenagers, but it is very accurate and very interesting. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Walter. So, in honor of teddy bears, these are some teddy bears that you've given me, but we have for you one that says, "Somebody loves me" at Brevard College.
Oh, thank you.